The human brain built rockets, split the atom, and invented Wi-Fi, and somehow it still produces people who look at a crocodile, a cliff, or a load-bearing wall and think, yeah, I got this. That's the magic of confidence. It can turn a normal adult into a deluxe, limited edition disaster with car keys. In tonight's collection of elite bad decisions, we've got geniuses who fought dogs with science, argued with gravity like it was a suggestion, and treated basic survival instincts like optional software updates. These weren't unlucky people. These were volunteers in a very aggressive experiment called, What Happens If I Ignore Common Sense on Purpose? Every story starts the same way. One dumb idea, one wildly confident human, and one final moment where reality clocks in and absolutely ruins the vibe. So buckle up. These 10 people didn't just ignore warning signs. They basically auditioned to become them. Story 1. Dave turned the Grand Canyon into the dumbest comedy club on Earth. Dave was the kind of guy who thought being the funny one meant giving everyone around him a mild cardiac event and then acting like that counted as charisma. You know the type. Every group trip has one. The human energy drink. The guy who can't just look at a beautiful view like a normal adult. No, he has to climb on something, yell something, fake something, or turn a peaceful moment into a deleted scene from Jackass National Parks Edition. So when Dave and his friends visited the Grand Canyon, most people saw what it actually was, one of the most breathtaking natural wonders on Earth. A giant masterpiece carved by time, pressure, and ancient geology. Dave saw content. Not for the internet. This was worse. He saw an audience. Now the Grand Canyon is not just a hole. It is a gigantic, mile-deep reminder that gravity is real, patient, and absolutely not in the mood for improv. Most people respond to that with awe. Dave responded to it by deciding this was the perfect place to debut his signature bit, pretending to fall to his death. That was the joke. That was the whole art form. So while his friends were trying to take normal vacation photos, Dave wandered toward the edge like a man whose brain had accidentally been replaced with expired fireworks. He got near one of the unfenced areas, looked back to make sure people were watching, then suddenly slipped. Arms flying, legs flailing, full scream, full performance. His friends panicked. A couple tourists gasped. Someone probably saw their entire soul leave their body for half a second. And then Dave caught himself, stood up, and started laughing. That awful laugh. That gotcha bro laugh that makes everyone want to throw you directly into a tax audit. His friends nervously laughed too, mostly because nobody likes admitting they almost watched a man turn into canyon seasoning before lunch. But that tiny little burst of attention was all Dave needed, because to a bad comedian, pity laughter is heroin. So he did it again, and again. For like 10 straight minutes, Dave turned one of America's greatest landmarks into the world's dumbest one-man show. Fake stumble, fake scream, fake recovery, smug grin, repeat. Every time, he acted like he'd just invented comedy. Meanwhile, the Grand Canyon sat there like, okay, I can wait. And that's the funny part about reality. Reality always lets stupid people finish. Eventually, Dave wrapped up his performance with one last dramatic fake slip. Big arms, big scream, big energy. People reacted. He recovered. He stood up, dusted himself off, and gave the crowd that little proud look mediocre men get when they think they've crushed it. Then he took one casual step backward. Just one. A tiny little confidence step. Unfortunately, there was no ground there. Because he had spent the last 10 minutes joking at the exact location where the joke could become a documentary. Witnesses said the expression on his face changed instantly, from smug camp counselor to man discovering consequences in real time. There was no funny recovery this time. No fake scream, no punchline. Just one very short, very real noise as Dave dropped out of sight and finally committed to the bit harder than anyone in comedy history. He spent 10 minutes pretending to fall into the Grand Canyon for attention. Then he did it for real. For free. Story 2. Vlad declared war on a load-bearing wall and lost like an idiot. Vlad had recently bought a cheap apartment in an old concrete building, which is usually your first clue that either the plumbing is cursed, the wiring is from the Cold War, or the building itself is being held together by prayer and one very important chunk of concrete. Guess which one this was? Vlad's dream was to turn his sad little apartment into a sleek, modern, open-concept masterpiece. You know, one of those places where every room looks like it belongs to a guy who owns exactly 3 forks and calls himself a minimalist because he forgot to buy furniture. There was just one problem. Right in the middle of the apartment stood a giant concrete pillar. A thick one. An ugly one. This is probably here for a reason, one. To any normal person, that pillar said, "Hello, I support things." To Vlad, it said, "I am ruining the vibe." And once a man decides something is ruining the vibe, civilization gets about 20 minutes to live. Now, Vlad was not an architect. He was not an engineer. He was not even one of those fake experts who watch 12 straight hours of home renovation videos and suddenly start saying words like bearing load and shear force like a divorced dad with Wi-Fi. No, Vlad was much dumber than that. He watched 1 or 2 demolition clips online, saw some guy knock down a garden shed in flip-flops, and immediately promoted himself to CEO of Structural Decisions. When his wife asked the very reasonable question, "Are you sure that pillar isn't important?" Vlad laughed the laugh of a man about to become a cautionary tale. "It's decorative," he said. Decorative, yes, because in old concrete apartment blocks, they just install random giant support columns for style. Pure aesthetic, just a little industrial seasoning. So Vlad invited a few friends over, grabbed a sledgehammer, cracked open some beers, and got to work turning his living room into the dumbest episode of HGTV ever filmed. The first hit landed with a heavy thud. Concrete dust flew. Everybody cheered. Because stupid people always cheer during the warm-up phase of disaster. Then came the warning signs. Little cracks started crawling across the ceiling. The room made that deep groaning sound buildings make when they are actively reconsidering their relationship with gravity. Even Vlad's friends, who were not exactly Nobel Prize material themselves, started backing toward the door. His wife told them to stop. The ceiling sagged. The pillar fractured. And Vlad, because confidence is the leading cause of confidence, kept swinging. Then it happened. With one final hit, the pillar gave up. For one beautiful half-second, Vlad stood in the exact open-concept living room he wanted. Then the apartment above him came downstairs uninvited. The floor collapsed. Concrete crashed. Furniture followed. The whole place folded in on itself like the world's angriest sandwich. Rescue crews later confirmed that Vlad had technically succeeded. He did open the space, just not in the way Zillow usually means it. He didn't remove a pillar. He removed himself from the homeowner community forever. Story 3. Randy tried to blow gasoline out of his garage and invented redneck NASA. Randy was the kind of suburban genius who believed every household problem had the same solution. Use a louder machine. Leaves? Leaf blower. Dust? Leaf blower. Small puddle? Honestly, probably leaf blower. So when he accidentally knocked over a gas can in his garage one Saturday afternoon, his brain immediately went to the only tool he truly respected: the screaming orange wind cannon hanging on the wall. Now, a cautious person might have opened the garage door, grabbed some rags, maybe muttered a few swear words, and cleaned it up like an adult. But Randy didn't see a dangerous puddle of highly flammable liquid slowly turning his garage into a vapor-filled bomb chamber. He saw inconvenience. And inconvenience, in Randy's America, was the greatest injustice of all. So instead of mopping up the gasoline, he decided to air it out by blasting it with a leaf blower, because apparently his understanding of chemistry came from cartoons and confidence. The scene was beautiful in the worst possible way. There he stood in gym shorts, old sneakers, and the posture of a man who had never once been corrected by reality hard enough. One hand on the gas can, one hand on the leaf blower. Garage door open, lawnmower nearby, tools everywhere, water heater in the corner. Basically every object in the room had the potential to either explode or help something else explode. And Randy? Randy felt in control. He yanked the starter cord. The leaf blower roared to life like an angry mosquito with a felony record, and Randy aimed that thing straight at the puddle. Gasoline sprayed across the floor in a widening mist, turning from bad spill into flammable weather system. The fumes spread instantly. The garage filled with vapor so fast it practically developed a zip code. At this point, the room had become less of a garage and more of a strongly worded suggestion from the fire department. But Randy kept going, because when a man with bad instincts sees a problem getting visibly worse, his first thought is never stop. It's usually more power. So he raised the throttle. That was the moment science finally got tired of being ignored. See, gasoline doesn't need a giant dramatic movie spark. It just needs one tiny ignition source, one little hot point, one microscopic whoops, and the leaf blower's motor, already running hot like it had its own opinions about survival, provided exactly that. The garage exploded, not Hollywood style with a cool slow-motion walkaway. Randy did not become an action hero. He became a cautionary tale wrapped in pressure, fire, and instant regret. The blast tore through the garage, launched tools like angry confetti, and sent the door flying outward like the house had rejected him personally. Neighbors later said they heard a boom so loud it sounded like somebody had tried to launch a lawn care appliance into low Earth orbit, which, in a way, is exactly what happened. Randy had looked at a puddle of gasoline and thought, you know what this needs? Wind. And for one brief, glorious, unbelievably stupid moment, he turned his garage into Cape Canaveral for morons. Story 4. Tiffany backed off a cliff for 1 bar of signal, and the pettiest text in human history. Tiffany was not hiking for peace, reflection, or any of that healthy outdoor nonsense people pretend to enjoy on Instagram. She was on a mountain overlook in California for one reason only: to send a text message with the emotional force of a slap. She was in the middle of an argument with her sister over a borrowed sweater, which is already a great reminder that human beings will absolutely risk everything over fabric and unresolved childhood tension. The text Tiffany was trying to send wasn't just a reply. In her mind, it was the reply. The kind of message you type, delete, retype, reread, adjust, sharpen, and season like a steak before sending it into battle. It was art. It was vengeance. It was the final nuclear missile in the war of petty women's knitwear. There was just one problem. The signal sucked. Now, normal people see no service and accept that the universe is asking them to calm down. Maybe breathe. Maybe look at the giant, gorgeous mountains surrounding them. Maybe postpone the sweater-based blood feud for 45 minutes. But Tiffany was not interested in nature. Nature had no typing bubble. So while everyone else was admiring the view, Tiffany was staring at the top corner of her screen like a gambler watching a slot machine. 1 bar, gone. 1 bar, gone again. The mountain was teasing her, mocking her, weaponizing hope. She walked away from the main overlook to get a better signal, because that's how these stories always begin. One person quietly wandering off from safety because their phone has become their religion. She held it up high over her head, like she was trying to contact God, Verizon, and Satan all at once. Her entire world shrank to 5 glowing inches of pure spite. Tourists talked, wind blew, birds existed, none of it mattered. Tiffany was locked in. This was no longer a vacation. This was a tactical communications mission. Then she noticed something. Every time she stepped back a little, the signal flickered. 1 bar, then none, then 1 bar again. That was all the encouragement she needed. Because the human brain, when fueled by annoyance, becomes a raccoon with Wi-Fi. So Tiffany kept stepping backward. Just a little more. Phone up. Eyes glued to the screen. Thumb hovering over send. She was so focused on delivering the perfect digital uppercut that she completely forgot one tiny detail about mountain overlooks. Some of them end. People nearby started reacting. One guy shouted. Another pointed. Tiffany either didn't hear them or mentally filed them under haters. She was too close now. She could feel it. Victory was right there. All she needed was 1 more step. So she took it. And her foot found absolutely nothing. For one insane little moment, the phone finally got full enough signal to send the text. Which means Tiffany technically won the argument. For about half a second. Then gravity entered the chat. She never saw the reply. But somewhere out there, her sister's phone lit up with one final nasty sweater message from a woman who literally traded her entire existence for better reception. And honestly, That is the most modern death imaginable. Story 5. Earl turned a lawnmower into a drag racer and immediately rejoined the food chain. Earl lived in the kind of neighborhood where every garage contained at least 3 suspicious power tools, 2 broken chairs, and one man who believed the phrase, "I can make that faster," was a personality. Earl was that man. To him, a lawnmower wasn't a lawnmower. It was untapped potential. A machine being held back by cowardice, factory settings, and what he called government-level imagination. He didn't want to cut grass. He wanted to dominate it. He wanted his yard trimmed at the speed of a felony. So when a friend jokingly said, "You should put nitrous on that thing," Earl did what all dangerous idiots do when they hear a terrible idea out loud. He treated it like expert consultation. Now, for normal people, nitrous belongs in race cars, illegal street setups, and movies where someone shifts 18 times in 10 seconds. It does not belong on a riding lawnmower whose natural purpose is creeping across a suburban yard while an old man drinks beer and stares at dandelions. But Earl wasn't building a mower anymore. He was building destiny. For the next week, his garage became a meth lab version of NASCAR. He watched a few videos, ignored all the parts that involved engineering, and focused mainly on the parts where engines got loud and men nodded proudly. He bolted on a small nitrous kit, modified the fuel line in a way that would make a mechanic faint on command, and removed what he described as unnecessary safety junk, which is usually the final sentence before EMTs become relevant. By Saturday afternoon, the machine was ready. Or more accurately, it was assembled. His friends came over, carrying cheap beer and the exact facial expressions people wear when they know something stupid is about to happen, but also don't want to miss it. Somebody started recording. Of course they did. America may not agree on much, but we are united by one sacred value. If your friend is about to do something life-altering and incredibly dumb, you film horizontally. Earl climbed onto the mower like a man mounting his throne. He revved the engine. It coughed, growled, and vibrated like it already wanted out of the situation. He grinned at the crowd, cracked his neck like he was entering a title fight, and yelled, "Y'all ready to see some real horsepower?" No, Earl. They were about to see lawn horsepower. He hit the throttle. The mower lurched forward across the yard way faster than any mower should ever move, unless it has recently been cursed. For one glorious second, Earl looked unstoppable, flying over uneven grass, eyes watering, cheeks flapping, beer-bellied confidence operating at full voltage. And then he hit the nitrous. The machine didn't accelerate so much as abandon civilization. The front wheels lifted. The mower bounced off a tree root, launched sideways, and became less of a landscaping tool and more of a judgment from above. Earl was thrown backward, then forward, then completely off the machine as it cartwheeled into a fence, exploded through a flower bed, and died upside down in a kiddie pool like the world's dumbest meteor. Witnesses said Earl's final expression was a perfect mix of triumph, confusion, and a man realizing way too late that he had just tried to street race a Toro. He wanted a faster mower. What he actually built was a mechanical obituary with cup holders. Story 6. Kyle tried to stage an indoor fireworks proposal and accidentally proposed to the fire department. Kyle was the kind of man who thought romance was just regular emotion plus unnecessary explosives. You know the species. The guy who can't just say "I love you" over dinner like a civilized mammal. No. He needs a drone shot, a smoke machine, a playlist called Final Boss Feelings, maybe a violinist, maybe a horse, maybe a minor electrical emergency. Because in Kyle's mind, a proposal wasn't supposed to feel intimate. It was supposed to feel like the ending of a movie directed by a man with 3 DUIs and access to pyrotechnics. So when he decided to propose to his girlfriend, Ashley, he rejected all the normal options. Beach? Too basic. Restaurant? Too boring. Garden with candles? Too Pinterest. Kyle wanted fireworks, inside the house. Because apparently he had looked at the phrase indoor pyrotechnics and interpreted it as romantic with a touch of arson. Now, to be fair, Kyle did not think he was building a death trap. He thought he was building a moment, a memory, a story they'd tell their grandchildren one day. Instead, he was building the reason insurance companies drink. For 2 days, Kyle turned his living room into a low-budget Bond villain wedding package. He strung up decorative lights, bought fake rose petals in industrial quantities, and, for reasons known only to men who confuse spectacle with intelligence, rigged a set of small celebration fireworks behind the couch and near the curtains. Near the curtains. That should have been the end of the idea. That should have been the exact sentence where an adult brain finally stands up and says, "Hey, Chief, maybe let's not put open flame near our giant fabric windows." But Kyle didn't have that kind of brain. Kyle had event planner mania. Kyle had YouTube confidence. Kyle had the dead-eyed optimism of a man who had watched one tutorial and skipped the important parts where the instructor says, "Do not do this in an enclosed space unless you are licensed and deeply insured." The night arrived. Ashley came home expecting dinner. Instead, she opened the door to a living room that looked like Cupid had been hired to decorate a nightclub. Candles everywhere. Lights dimmed. Kyle, standing in the center of the room wearing a blazer and the expression of a man who truly believed he was about to become a legend. He got down on one knee. Ashley gasped. Kyle smiled. And then, because apparently this man could not let one good decision survive the evening, he hit the remote trigger. The fireworks went off immediately. Not beautifully, not gracefully, not in a magical little shower of sparkle. They erupted like the living room had just lost its mind. One shot hit the ceiling, another blasted sideways. A third ricocheted into the curtain, which caught fire with the speed and enthusiasm of a system that had been waiting all day for its moment. Ashley screamed. Kyle jumped up. Sparks flew everywhere. A decorative arch collapsed. Candles tipped. The smoke alarm, the only intelligent voice in the building, began screaming at a frequency usually reserved for submarine emergencies. Neighbors called 911 before Kyle could even process that his romantic master plan had become a live-action safety seminar. By the time firefighters arrived, the proposal was over, the living room was half charred, and Kyle was outside in dress shoes, covered in soot, holding a ring box and the smoldering remains of what had briefly been the perfect night. He wanted to ask Ashley to spend forever with him. Instead, he created the kind of evening that makes a woman seriously reconsider the next 10 minutes. Story 7. Brandon tried to livestream himself touching a homemade electric fence and got body-checked by science. Brandon was one of those guys who thought the internet had robbed him of his destiny. In his mind, he wasn't just some random man in cargo shorts with a ring light and poor judgment. No, he was an undiscovered content beast, a visionary, a future legend being unfairly ignored by an algorithm that, for some reason, kept rewarding cooking videos and women folding laundry instead of whatever nonsense Brandon was doing in his backyard. And Brandon's brand, if you can call repeated bad decisions a brand, was simple. Do something stupid, scream loudly, and hope strangers reward it with attention. So one summer weekend, while standing in his yard surrounded by tools, extension cords, and exactly zero adult supervision, Brandon came up with what he believed was his breakthrough moment. He was going to build a homemade electric fence. Not to keep animals out, not to protect property, not for any sane agricultural reason. He built it so he and his friends could touch it on camera, for the laughs. That was the business model. Now, a real electric fence delivers a controlled pulse, short burst, specific voltage, designed to scare livestock, not send a grown man into the astral plane. But Brandon did not buy a proper fence charger. That would have required patience, reading, and admitting that expertise exists outside his own skull. Instead, he pieced together his setup using random wire, an old power unit, some clamps, and the kind of confidence usually found in men who say things like, "Trust me, bro, I watched a guy explain it." Which guy? Doesn't matter. Because once a stupid man says, "I saw this online," all safety immediately leaves the chat. By late afternoon, the masterpiece was ready. A janky little rectangle of wire stretched between garden stakes like the world's saddest supervillain experiment. His buddies showed up with cheap beer and the excited expressions of men who were absolutely not going to stop this, but would definitely retell it later like they were innocent bystanders. Someone started the live stream. Brandon stepped into frame shirtless, because of course he did. Shirtless is how men announce they are about to learn something expensive. He grinned at the camera, pointed at the fence, and gave a speech about pain tolerance, masculinity, and breaking the internet, which was a bold thing to say while standing next to a homemade electricity prank in flip-flops. He reached toward the wire, pulled back, laughed. The comments were flying. His friends were yelling. The whole moment had that awful energy of a bad idea being loved just enough to keep going. Then Brandon decided touching it with one hand wasn't dramatic enough, so he grabbed it with both. And that's when the entire situation stopped being comedy and became a public demonstration of why electricians keep getting paid. Because Brandon had not built a cute little shock fence. He had built a deeply personal argument with current flow. The charge ripped through him so hard his body locked up like a folding chair. His arms seized, his jaw clenched, and for one brutal second, he stood there frozen in place, looking like a man who had just been possessed by a generator. Then the current threw him backward. He hit the ground, the live stream went insane, and his friends, who up until that point had been laughing like hyenas with driver's licenses, suddenly remembered they were watching a human being get tackled by physics in real time. Brandon wanted a viral moment, and he got one. Just not the kind where you post a follow-up. Story 8. Barry got drunk, climbed into a crocodile enclosure, and briefly mistook himself for Australian royalty. Barry had spent the evening doing what a shocking number of terrible stories begin with, drinking in Australia like he had diplomatic immunity. And after enough beer, the human brain starts replacing useful thoughts with deeply patriotic nonsense like, I could absolutely fight nature tonight. Barry was way past that point. He had moved beyond normal bad judgment and entered that special drunken stage where every dangerous animal starts looking less like a predator and more like a weird opportunity. So when he and his equally useless friends wandered near a zoo after the pub, most people would have looked at the fences, the warning signs, the darkness, and the giant reptile enclosure and thought, let's go home before one of us becomes educational material. Barry thought, I should ride that. Because Barry had apparently looked at a 16-foot saltwater crocodile, the closest thing Earth has to an armored murder submarine, and decided what the moment needed was cowboy energy. Now, for people who are not aggressively committed to being remembered incorrectly, crocodiles are not oversized lizards with attitudes. They are prehistoric ambush machines. They have survived basically unchanged since the era when the planet was still testing nightmare concepts. Their whole thing is patience, explosive violence, and turning bad decisions into protein. Barry, however, saw Goliath, the zoo's giant male crocodile, lying completely still near the water, and came to the drunkest conclusion available. He's chill. No, Barry, he's efficient. There's a difference. Still, Barry climbed the fence. That alone should have gotten him disqualified from life. But alcohol is a magnificent liar. It tells men they can sing, text their ex, and dominate apex predators. So down he went into the enclosure, wobbling toward the crocodile with the swagger of a man whose bloodstream had replaced oxygen with beer foam and lies. His friends were filming, obviously, because friendship at that level is no longer about protection. It's about documentation. Barry got closer. Closer. Close enough that any sober human would have heard every survival instinct in their body screaming like a car alarm in church. But Barry had muted all internal warning systems around pint number 6. He reached Goliath, grinned at his audience, and, with the confidence of a man who had never once earned his own confidence, jumped onto the crocodile's back. For one stupid, glorious half-second, Barry was technically doing it. He was riding the crocodile. And then the crocodile remembered it was a crocodile. What happened next was less animal encounter and more nature-correcting paperwork. Goliath exploded into motion with the speed of a trap slamming shut. He twisted, launched, and went into a death roll so violent it looked like the planet itself had spun Barry off for being disrespectful. One second Barry was performing drunk Australian mythology. The next, he was in the water getting introduced to 200 million years of uninterrupted bad news. It was over fast. Way faster than Barry's confidence. He wanted to leave the pub with a story. Instead, he became one, and somewhere in the dark, that crocodile probably slid right back into the water thinking the same thing every apex predator eventually thinks about human beings. Why do they keep delivering themselves? Story 9. Trevor climbed a water tower for better Wi-Fi and accidentally logged out of the cloud forever. Trevor was the kind of guy who treated weak internet like a personal attack. Not an inconvenience, not a minor modern annoyance, a betrayal. If a video buffered, Trevor took it emotionally. If a file upload stalled at 87%, he acted like the federal government had singled him out for psychological warfare. He lived in a small town where the signal was spotty, the cell service was moody, and the local Wi-Fi had all the strength and consistency of a dying raccoon. For most people, this meant patience. For Trevor, it meant war. One night, around midnight, he was trying to upload a huge video file for what he called a content opportunity, which in Trevor's case usually meant some deeply unnecessary clip of himself doing something shirtless near machinery. The upload kept freezing. 1 bar, then none. Then 1 bar again. His laptop looked like it was being haunted by a very petty ghost. A normal adult would have gone to sleep and tried again in the morning. Trevor looked out the window and saw the town's old water tower silhouetted against the night sky and thought, higher equals better signal. That is the kind of thought that sounds smart only if you've spent your entire life confusing optimism with physics. Now, to be fair, Trevor wasn't entirely wrong. Height can help with reception, but there's a huge difference between stand near a window and free climb municipal infrastructure at midnight with a backpack and a laptop like a Wi-Fi goblin. Trevor did not respect that difference. He threw on sneakers, grabbed his laptop, stuffed a portable hotspot and charger into a backpack, and headed out into the night with the determined posture of a man absolutely not qualified to be outdoors unsupervised. When he reached the water tower, he looked up at the metal ladder bolted to the side and saw not a terrible idea, but a solution. A vertical solution. So up he went, higher and higher, climbing in darkness, one hand on the ladder, the other clutching his backpack like he was carrying the nuclear codes for bad content. The town below got smaller, the wind got meaner, the metal got colder. Any reasonable survival instinct would have kicked in around the point where the ground started looking like a suggestion. But Trevor had replaced survival with upload percentage. At the top platform, he pulled himself over the railing, dropped to one knee, opened the laptop, and waited. And for one glorious second, it worked. Full bars. Beautiful, stupid, majestic full bars. Trevor smiled like a man who thought he had outsmarted modern telecommunications with pure hillbilly determination. He opened the file, hit upload, and watched the progress bar finally start moving. That's when the wind hit. Not movie wind, not poetic wind, just one hard, cold shove from reality. Trevor lunged for the laptop as it slid, lost his balance, grabbed the railing with one hand, and made the classic final mistake of every man who thinks he's in control right before he absolutely isn't. He tried to save the device. The laptop made it exactly nowhere useful. Trevor made it even less. He wanted stronger signal. He got a brief connection, one successful upload, and a permanent disconnection from literally everything else. Story 10. Gary built a dog whistle so advanced it started attacking his organs like a jazz band. Gary was a retired engineer from Florida, which meant he had 3 things that should never be left alone together: free time, old tools, and opinions. And for months, all 3 had been focused on one enemy so small and stupid it should not have won this war in the first place: his neighbor's tiny barking dog, Pico. Pico barked in the morning. Pico barked at birds. Pico barked at leaves. Pico barked like he was being paid by the alarm industry. Most people would have handled this like normal adults. Knock on the door, buy earplugs, maybe mutter, "I hate that dog," into a coffee mug and move on with life. But Gary was not built for peace. Gary believed every minor inconvenience was just a problem waiting for an unnecessarily complicated machine, so he decided to build a dog whistle. That sounds reasonable for about 4 seconds. Then you remember Gary was the kind of man who saw a simple store-bought solution and thought, no, I should invent something louder, uglier, and somehow more personal. For the next few weeks, his garage looked like a Home Depot had collided with untreated ego. Pipes, valves, pressure gauges, steel tubing, a compressor big enough to wake the dead, or at least alert the county. He downloaded acoustic formulas off the internet, skimmed them with the confidence of a man reading terms and conditions, and then decided to trust his instincts. That is one of the deadliest phrases in human history, because Gary didn't actually understand the part where a dog whistle is supposed to create high-frequency sound. What he built produced the exact opposite, a brutal low-frequency infrasound wave, the kind of vibration you don't hear so much as experience with your skeleton. It was less annoying whistle and more earthquake-doing ASMR directly into your liver. But Gary didn't know that. He just knew the dog was barking again, and tonight, science was going to settle the score. So he wheeled his homemade chrome nightmare to the edge of the driveway, put on safety goggles, which is hysterical by the way, because at that point he may as well have worn oven mitts to stop a meteor, and flipped the switch. At first, nothing happened. No noise, no whistle, just a weird pressure in the air. The windows rattled, the garage door shivered. A soda can on his workbench slid off and hit the floor like it had suddenly developed survival instincts Gary did not possess. And Gary? Gary smiled, because stupid men loved the phrase, "it's working," right before the universe slaps them with itemized consequences. The invisible wave rolled through the driveway and straight through Gary's body. Turns out dogs aren't the only creatures affected by vibration. Human organs also have opinions. And Gary's machine had accidentally tuned itself to frequencies that made his insides react like they were trapped in the world's worst speaker test. Pico was fine. Gary was not. After all that effort, all that engineering, all that garage NASA swagger, the only thing Gary truly managed to silence was himself. So tonight we watched a man turn the Grand Canyon into a comedy audition for death. Another genius remove a support pillar because it ruined the vibe. One suburban astronaut launches garage with gasoline and a leaf blower. One woman trade her life for a sweater text. One redneck turn a lawnmower into a missile. One romantic pyromaniac propose directly to the fire department. One internet goblin get body slammed by electricity. One drunk hero volunteer as crocodile delivery. One Wi-Fi pilgrim climb a water tower into permanent offline mode. And one engineer build a dog whistle that basically declared civil war on his own organs. Humanity. Still a fascinating species. Terrible roommates for common sense. Now I need to know, who was the undisputed heavyweight champion of stupidity tonight? Was it Dave turning a national park into open mic night? Vlad fighting a load-bearing pillar like it insulted his furniture? Barry trying to ride a crocodile like drunk royalty? Or Gary, the only man on Earth to lose a technology battle to both a tiny dog and his own spleen? Drop your top 3 dumbest deaths in the comments and defend your ranking like your IQ depends on it. Because based on this list, some of you may already be in trouble. The scary thing about these stories isn't that these people were evil, cursed, or uniquely doomed. It's that almost every one of them started with the same sentence, "I got this." And that, right there, is how civilization keeps producing legends nobody should ever copy. Not with bad luck, not with mystery, just with a little ego, a terrible idea, and the unwavering confidence of a man who has mistaken surviving previous stupidity for actual intelligence. So the next time you feel tempted to freestyle against gravity, electricity, fire, wildlife, architecture, or your own homemade inventions, maybe don't. Because common sense may not be flashy, but it has an undefeated record against idiots.